ahead and get started. So like I said, we're going to be talking about rest, a biomechanical perspective, and reviewing a couple other concepts around rest and improving our rest. So in the beginning, and one of my first influences in my profession was Mark Verstegen, the founder of Athletes Performance, now called Exos, and his mantra, excuse me, really was work plus rest equals success. The entire building was set up in that aspect. One half of the building was where the athletes did the work. One half of the building was where the rest happened, and they were equally as important in providing the athlete with a platform or a blueprint to success. And oftentimes with the elite athlete especially, they came in our doors not necessarily needing more work, but actually needing more rest. Like rest was the missing part of this equation. And then also the work was not the smartest work, right? Like some of the movements in their work were causing some destructive forces that by improving their work quality, not quantity, and then adding in rest, really any form of rest, that is where the magic happens. And that continues to be my model for what I do for my own body and for my athletes as well, is ultimately improving our rest, because we all get enough work in our life, right? Stress is work. Work is stress. The body doesn't discriminate on stress. It views stress the same, whether it is physical stress or mental stress, emotional stress, whatever it is. It piles onto our physical body, our emotional body, our mental body the same. So adding in that rest is key to longevity and good health. So when I started learning from Philip, why I knew he would be another mentor in my life, and why he's so profound, is it fit that mold. He was literally speaking the same language of us. His quote from his book Muscles and Meridians is the opposite to human movement is human rest. Movement and rest are flip sides of the same coin, right? Meaning they go together. Like you can't separate them. And if you don't rest well, you probably don't move well. And if you don't move well, you probably are not accessing your rest very well, right? And so it really mirrored that beginning mantra for me, that work plus rest equals success. And so in this lecture, we're going to just briefly review homeostasis and resiliency, briefly review tensegrity and shape, knowing that we're going to learn a lot about tensegrity, continuing to learn more within this lesson and the following lessons of the Revitalized Mentorship. We're going to talk about the concept of biomechanical tune, that is defined by Philip Beetz. That's what he refers to in his work. And we're going to talk about ways to actually measure biomechanical rest, and then how do we access it, right? So we're talking about homeostasis and resiliency. We're really talking about the body's ability to maintain a sort of equilibrium or stability within its inside, right, with its physiological function, while dealing with external changes. So external changes, stressors, etc. Like our ability for all of our physiology to function optimally, no matter what's happening to us, right? Basically, this is allowing for a positive compensation of stress, right? If you refer back to probably your undergraduate studies, learning about the adaptation of stress, right? When we're talking about building muscles or healing bone or whatever it may be, the super compensation model is like you load, you rest, and then you have this super compensation that then you grow and function at a higher level from that. This homeostasis that happens from a micro level to a macro level is what really provides our resiliency, whether that's physical or physiological resiliency. And that really is the key to that equation, that work plus rest equals success. Right? Success would be ultimately homeostasis, maintaining equilibrium and stability within our internal environment so we can expose or express our power, performance, strength, mental skills, whatever it may be. So remember, when I'm explaining this to the athletes, or anybody really, I use this idea of this like cup, right? Like we have a cup. All of us have a cup. Our athletes, I tell them their cup's like a little bigger. It's like I have this mug and they have a 7-Eleven supersized 64-ounce cup available. So I can put a lot of things in my cup, right? Like all the things that happen to me in life. And if I don't do something to sort of dump it out, then all of a sudden my cup starts overfilling with stress. And then that's when we have problems, right? That's when we lose the ability to maintain that equilibrium, that homeostasis. So that's when our resiliency is affected, right? Ultimately, we want to be able to add a lot to our cup because genetics more than likely defines the size of our cup. We want to deal with whatever size cup we have and maintain it into a state that we can work with it, right? And this means that we need to actually train that. We need to train not only the quality of information that we're putting in the cup, right? Like good movement fills up the cup only so much. Really crappy movement is like taking up a lot of our cup. So, right, like part of it is we just need to make the stressors we're putting in there a little bit better. And then also we need to learn how to sort of open up a drain at the bottom and drain some out, right? So we are constantly have space to fill up, right? Which then virtually gives us that large cup that maybe the athletes have, right? So I always tell the athletes, it's not, oftentimes what makes them different is that they're just way better compensators. They just have more space to compensate. Their nervous system is better at having more room on the bell curve of maintaining that equilibrium. And so just like we want to have variability in how well we apply the stress, we also want to have variability in all the ways we can access the rest or drain out that. So like I said, it's literally our ability to maintain shape after an external load is placed upon the structure, or the ability to compensate for stress, basically, right? To maintain a certain level of body and mind and spirit health, right? Maintenance of our health, maintenance of our function, maintenance of our shape, etc. Literally the ability to bounce back. So as I've said before, compensation is not bad. This was one of those things that when I learned it in the Barral Institute, that is this is a quote from Jean-Pierre Barral, that compensation is not bad. When we lose the ability to compensate, that's the bad thing. This was something that was took me a second to really wrap my head around, because for a really long time, when back in the day and early in my career when I was educating people, we're all about compensation is terrible. Movement compensation, we don't want any of that. Movement compensation leads to pain and injury, and compensation is a bad thing. And we were very well aware that athletes were good compensators, but we thought that was that was the thing we were trying to fix. And immersing myself in the osteopathic world really allowed me to see this big picture of like, it's not that compensation bad. Compensation is what makes us amazing. The ability to compensate is what makes us so magical and so able-bodied humans, right? Like that is what makes the athlete great. That they can still be this amazing high performance machine and achieve all these wonderful things in competition and in sport and within their body, despite how much they are carrying, like how much load, how much stress they are carrying. So it really is truly that our ability to not be able to compensate is a bad thing. And so it doesn't mean that I'm going to ignore movement compensation, but it means that if I'm just trying to improve their performance or I'm just trying to make them feel better, there's other ways to help that besides only being focused on making them move better, right? Like if I can access them in any way to sort of improve the size of their cup, right? The space available in their cup, they're gonna feel better because their body can then naturally handle things better. So when we lose this ability to compensate, more than likely that means stress has outweighed rest or recovery. And when stress outweighs rest, what we'll see physically is an alteration of our homeostatic rhythms. That's going to be our breathing, our sleep, the fluid dynamics. So a lymph flow problem or blood flow problem, maybe blood pressures change, heart rates change, cerebral spinal fluid flow has changed, right? Um, there may be some sort of trauma that initiated it, or maybe not. Might just be a cumulative too much stress. So, and in general, there could also be implicit feelings of not feeling safe. So going back to that neuroception concept that we talked a little bit in the lesson one webinar, and we'll continue to talk more about in the future when we're diving a little bit deeper into the polyvagal theory. So when we talk about resiliency and we talk about the body being in tune or you know its physiological state, we can also look at someone's shape, and our shape and our physiology is definitely connected, right? Our shape is going to be manipulated based on how we are feeling both internally and externally, like what is happening to us. We will change our shape accordingly. And when we change our shape, we also change our function. For example, if I am, like emotionally, if I'm having a hard day, if I'm sad, I'm kind of like tired, and I'm a little bit like my chest is caved in, my head is forward, that decreases the space of my thoracic cavity and it's going to change physiologically my breath patterns, right? My breath pattern changes. That has the ability to change um, a lot of the physiology in my body and just the feeling of how I am in the world, right? And so physiology changes, function changes, all because my shape changed. Vice versa, if you are having a bad day and you're in that posture and you kind of catch yourself and you think, no, no, I don't want to feel like this today. And so you can kind of fake it till you make it, and you can stand up a little bit taller and you can open up your chest, and maybe you'll do a few breathing exercises to improve your mobility. Your shape changes, and then all of a sudden your breathing pattern changes because now it has more space, and so therefore your physiology changes. So it works both directions. And so it's important to understand that when we're looking at a biomechanical model of rest, knowing that some of the rest postures are going to be ways that we can change people's shape, right? Especially if they're out of shape. And we'll talk about more about that, what that means. But if we can improve someone's shape, their mobility, their alignment, then they are more likely to have the spaces available for the physiology to function well. When the physiology functions well, we're more likely to be in that homeostatic balance. So our shape is very important. Um, but I try to get out of calling it posture all the time and understanding why it's important from a movement or making people posture perfect, right? It has more to do with the ability to function well from a physiology standpoint, right? And understanding that our postures, when we're posturing, it oftentimes just has more to do with how we are feeling in the world, um, um, emotionally or mentally, than necessarily um, what's going on musculoskeletally, right? Like I talked about this in the first lesson that we have a very body biased approach to what we do because we work in this field of sports medicine, but remembering that it isn't all about the musculoskeletal system, right? Like the bigger picture is the human organism, and at the end of the day, the way we change our shape is a reflection of how we feel, both internally and externally, or both physiologically and emotionally. So this is, basically what this slide is saying too, is is exactly that. So from this feeling of being out of shape, so that's like Philip Beetz's book, the subtitle, The Manipulation of Shape. His concept of shape is something that is really interesting. And he coined the term biomechanical tune. And he talks about how in tune you are influences your shape and influences your movement. So there's plenty of ways that we have already talked about in the industry about being in shape, right? Like that is, if somebody looks at you and thinks that you're overweight, or maybe that you're have high blood pressure or high cholesterol, somebody would be like, oh, well, we need to get you back in shape, right? And so it's a term that's used quite a bit, um, and you'll start understanding the shape and how the shape and physiology is so connected when you start to notice that people who, well, not start to notice, when you start to notice, when you start to implement these rest um, practices, you'll start to feel a change in your shape and you'll start to see a change in your athlete's shape. And so you'll notice, yeah, shape does have a lot to do with how in tune I am, right? Like oftentimes it's interesting because I'll evaluate someone and I'll see something that looks like it's a structural problem, right? Like they'll look like a joint is stuck and that they will have needed manual therapy. But we introduce some things to stimulate their rest nervous system. And when they do access it and I recheck those same ranges of motion, all of a sudden they don't have those limitations, right? And so our shape and things that look structural are very much more fluid than I think we appreciate, especially in a younger population. So biomechanical tunes. So Philip Beach basically said it refers to muscles and joints of the body interacting in a way that internal biomechanical friction and dissonance are kept to a minimum. He also said as an organism, humans have evolved to be self-tuning, right? They've evolved to maintain an equilibrium, to be resilient, to maintain shape, to bounce back, to have shit happen to them, but to keep on going and keep functioning optimally. We have this built-in ability to tune ourselves or tune each other as well. When we start talking about the polyvagal theory more, that will be more imperative as well. But in general, when he talks about decreasing internal biomechanical friction and dissonance, that is also another thing that made me think of like, the fascial system, right? Because we're talking about in the fascial system with the tensegrity, how it decompresses the joints and gives the joints a little bit more space. We also see that it improves our dynamic alignment, and so that the joint now is set up more in the neutral zone. And when the joint is set up in the neutral zone and doesn't have a whole lot of compression on it, right? It's a little bit floating in the fascia, then truly that there is less friction, there is less dissonance within the system, within that joint by joint system. And so improving tune is huge in terms of alignment, joint health, maintaining mobility, and being able to then have the mobility to express all the different vectors and variability and movement that is required in life and in sport. So Philip Philip basically describes that you can assess someone's biomechanical tune, right? Their ability to rest with the archetypal postures of repose. So archetypal just means original, and repose is another word for rest. So the original postures of rest is basically what that translates to in a more traditional American English language. But basically, through our history, our 6 million years of being a human species, right? Lying and sitting on the floor to rest and recover is embedded, like deeply embedded in who we are as humans, like as mammals. And other animals do this too. You'll see them using laying and sitting on the ground, on the floor, to rest and recover too. And each animal has a different preferred pattern based on their morphology. And that is what keeps us in tune, right? That is the self tuning occurs when you're using these postures regularly. When you're getting down to the floor to rest and then getting up from the floor to rest, right? That's the benefit of spending more time on the floor is you have to get up from the floor. So over the years, human society has moved away from these postures of rest as we've created furniture and ways to not have to get down on the floor all the way, right? Like literally the furniture and shoes are just ways we are immobilizing ourselves in a certain range of motion, right? It's like putting a cast on our arms with our arms stuck in a flexed position. You take the cast off and pretty soon that is your only available range of motion, right? From full flexion to 90 degrees of flexion. There's no way for you to go into the full extension because you've stopped using it. Does that make sense? Like the reason we're out of tune because we're not accessing our full mobility possible in all of our traditional archetypal postures of rest that we normally use. And even if you exercise, it's not frequent enough during the day for your body to keep that mobility and maintain that level of biomechanical tune, that decreased dissonance and friction within the joint. He theorizes or proposes that this could be a reason for the still high incidence of back pain despite an increased knowledge of the parts, pains, and injuries, right? Over the years, we've learned so much about back pain. So much. Like, so much about the disc, so much about the disc function, so much about the joint, so much about the nerves around the joint. So, like, we've learned so much, yet it's still so prevalent, right? We've learned so much about how to rehab it correctly. It's still so prevalent. So perhaps part of the reason why it's so prevalent is because we've been putting casts on our feet as shoes, and we sit on furniture instead of the floor. And so we're never really maximizing, utilizing our body's fullest capabilities, right? Here are some examples of archetypal postures of repose in different mammals. So on the left, you have traditional postures of a deep squat. a very traditional seated position among humans. It's very restful. You can hang out here. It's in dorsiflexion, which we will learn is a way that you can actually transition from that position really easily, right? Like if one of those guys needed to get up and do something, he could just literally just stand straight up and be ready to go. And then on the right, you have the giraffe and you have the kangaroo. The giraffe and the kangaroo, because of their body type and because of the demands of them and their species, they rest in certain ways, right? Kangaroos tend to predominantly lay on their sides to rest, and giraffes actually take a really long time to get to the ground and stand up from the ground, and they fold their legs underneath of them, right? Like it takes, I guess Philip was saying it takes like an hour, or not an hour. It takes quite a bit of long time for the giraffe to get down on the ground, and once it's there, it actually only sleeps or rests for about an hour, and then it stands back up. It takes some time to stand back up, and the giraffes are most vulnerable being attacked by predators when they're on the ground like that. So usually there's a second giraffe in the same area, like keeping watch. But this moment of rest is like such an important piece for them. But can you imagine if you felt bad for that? This is what Philip says. Like, can you imagine if you felt bad for that giraffe because you watched it get to the ground and it was like so challenging, and you just put a cot for it, right? Like you're like, oh hey, Sophie the giraffe, it looks like it's a huge pain in the ass to get on the ground. I want to help you out. I feel bad for you. Here, lay on this cot that is, 5 feet off the ground, and then it's not as hard to get down. It's faster. You can rest a little bit longer. Like, who doesn't love that, right? And so after a while of doing that, if all of a sudden you took that caught away from the giraffe, it literally wouldn't be able to get down on the ground anymore, and it wouldn't be able to rest, and then it would probably die, right? Because it's like you gave it a cast for its legs. Its hips and knees and feet need to go through full flexion, and now you didn't allow it to, and that immobility in an animal in the wild causes problems, right? It means they can't sleep. If they can't sleep, they're going to be slower, reaction time's lower. They're going to get attacked by predators more likely, right? They're less agile. So it's interesting that all of us, all mammals, have these resting on the ground scenarios, yet as humans have taken it out of our daily practice because we try to make things easier with furniture, right? And so the societal norms of it's weird to sit on the floor. Only people, like the only people in third world countries sit on the floor because what, can you not afford furniture, right? Like that's the thought process. Like why wouldn't you sit in the chair? That's so weird. But the weird thing is that we have been sitting in this furniture and that we are limiting our body from maximizing its normal expression of joint range of motion, right? Which ends up resulting in pain and injury. So self-tuning also is likely influenced by the sensory system. And that's the whole argument for being barefoot more often, right? The human society has also significantly decreased the sensory information into the organism by wearing shoes and walking on constructed surfaces instead of nature. So the way that we interpret our environment is through touch of our feet on the environment, right? Or our hands. And when we spend life in shoes and socks, we're not getting that information into our spine, into our brain about where we are and if we're safe, right? And so we decrease that input into our self-tuning mechanism as well. We're going to talk more about that actually when we're talking about the nervous system. Just since it does relate to the nerves, I want to keep it all within the nervous system talk. So, but you can't really, we still need to talk a little bit about the nervous system here just so you have a general idea of what it is. But again, we're going to talk more and more about that. So when we're looking at the stress and rest, right, these are things interpreted by the nervous system. Everything in our body is interpreted by the nervous system, right? We have the autonomic nervous system. There's three parts of the autonomic nervous system. This function is to regulate function of our organs. It's part of our peripheral nervous system, right? It's involuntary and reflexive, though trainable, right? Like part of the function of the autonomic nervous system is very trainable, meaning the heart rate and respiratory rate, sensory information, all of that is trainable, right? We can manipulate the autonomic nervous system responses to quite a bit of degree, voluntarily or consciously. The three parts are the sympathetic nervous system, which is traditionally your fight or flight, parasympathetic nervous system, which is your nervous system of rest and digest. And then there's the enteric nervous system, which is the newer part of the nervous system that people are still learning about, really. It's sometimes called the second brain because it can act, it's a nervous system within our digestive organs, and it can act independently of the central nervous system, right, of our brain. It doesn't need our brain to function. Like you can cut off information from the brain, right? You can cut off the vagus nerve information into our gut, or the sacral plexus parasympathetic information to our gut, and it will continue to function normally because it has afferent neurons, efferent neurons, and interneurons that can make decisions and change things. So it literally is independent. It can be independent of our brain. So when we talk about the polyvagal theory, we'll be talking about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic parts of the nervous system and how the vagus nerve affects those. And then ultimately, when we're talking about all of this rest information, even though we're talking about a biomechanical approach to rest, the biomechanical approach to rest is still tapping in to stimulating a parasympathetic nervous system response. Stimulate an environment that tells our body, tells our cells, tells our fascia, tells the intelligence of our human body that we are resting. It is okay to rest and digest. We are safe, right? Basically, that is what we're telling the brain. We are safe enough to kind of hit the pause button on life and rest and digest and do all the functions that come with resting and digestion, right? And so what an interesting concept that we can use these old original floor postures to maximize the balance of this rest and digest system. So some assumptions that we can make, really, that humans in society today are typically in a chronic sympathetic nervous system state, right? We're in a chronic stress state. And most people would like, yeah, that makes sense. Like everything we do during the day feels like we're just adding a lot of stress. And so we're kind of constantly in this state of decompensation, and we may have an inability to maintain this resilience because we're not maintaining our shape and our biomechanical tune. So as healthcare providers, both prevention and restoration of injury, illness, and disease lies in restoring the body's ability to compensate by balancing their autonomic nervous system and maintaining resilience through maintaining shape and biomechanical tune. So right now, when we look at stress and rest, there's a lot of ways that we know how to measure maybe the balance of it, or definitely measure rest. stress. So we can look at the biochemical things in our blood work. We can look at our respiratory rate. We can look at our heart rate. We can measure our heart rate variability. Those are all sort of common ways. The newer ways that we're proposing in this lecture is measuring biomechanical tune via the archetypal postures of repose and a sit and rise test, as well as using homeostatic acupressure points or trigger point palpation. So, sort of a new approach to measuring rest. So these are the 12 archetypal postures of repose that Philip Beach proposes in his book. We're going to go through each one of these. So first we'll talk about the scoring system. So Philip has described his scoring system based on a score of 1 through 5 for his in his original work. I will say that, and he will be quick to say too, this is not a research scoring system, right? It needs to be researched, but it is what made sense to him. So we'll honor that. Basically, a score of 5 means you're able to access the rest posture with good form, and you could probably rest in it for about 20 minutes. You don't have to make the person sit there for 20 minutes, but you just ask them an honest question, like, do you feel like you could hang out there for 20 minutes without pain? And you can tell by both the response of their facial expressions, how long it takes them to answer, if they're telling you the truth or not. A score of 4 is that they're easily able to access the rest position, but with poor form, which is oftentimes the case. A score of 3 is that they're able to get into the rest posture, but it's painful or uncomfortable after a few minutes. A score of 2 is that they are just able to get in the rest posture, so it's not super easy for them, but they can get there, but it's quickly painful and uncomfortable. And a score of 1 is that they're unable to get into the posture or be in the posture due to pain. Okay? So in this system of scoring, there's no zeros. The lowest score you can get is a 1. So you would get the lowest score possible out of the 12 postures would be 12. The highest score would be 60. I proposed this approach to scoring 0 to 12, meaning out of all the 12 postures, how many are accessible without pain? So, for example, if only the supine, prone, and sideline, Neanderthal, and cross-leg postures were available easily without pain, then they would score 4 out of 12. So I'm curious to see how many of the 12 postures they can actually access as rest. And actually accessing at rest would be the score of 4 or 5 of Philip's scoring system. So we're going to go over each of these postures and talk about kind of the finer points of what we're looking for and what we're looking at. Also, we'll try to give you some pointers on, like, once we're teaching somebody how to access them, sort of some of the coaching points for that. These videos that are in the lecture here are also available on my YouTube channel if you'd like to re-watch them. So one at a time here. This is our supine posture. Supine is laying on your back. And in the supine posture, we'll talk a little about this in the rest position, but ultimately, laying down in a reclined position is very restful, whether you're on your stomach or on your side or on your back. It's very restful because it stimulates the baroreceptors in our carotid artery and our aortic arch. Our blood pressure is changed and we are relaxed. That is a great thing to remember when we are trying to produce a rest response in someone, right? Like, the easiest thing you can always do is always take them to a reclined position. So in supine, we have this posture. So in the supine position, like I said in the video, the points you're looking for is one, if it's comfortable, and then you're looking at the base of their skull. Does it look like the base of their skull is on the ground, or is it higher up on their skull? Right? Are they extended? What their shoulder range of motion is like, where their rib cage is, like basically all the points of their body that are hitting the ground. Like, is it symmetrical? Um, in their spine, are they hitting the base of the skull, the thoracolumbar junction, and the sacrum, and the, like T6, the curve of the thorax, right? Like, are they hitting all of that? Their shoulder blades on the floor, are they curled up? If their arms are overhead, are they equal to each other? Are they touching the ground? Are they kind of like hanging out? All things are important to note and to see if they can access. Of course, too, like we'll continue to talk about more, it's often important just to note how they are so that when you do an intervention, you can check back in. So next is the prone posture. So the prone position is like our first position that gives us right and left side because of the head turn. And so I'll score them for the right side and I'll score them for the left side. Whatever their score, the lowest score is the score I keep. And of course, I'll note which side was better if they do have a better side. But in prone, you're looking at similar things. Like, what does their spine look like? The curves of their spine. Is their head range of motion different side to side? Can they get their shoulders in that position? How much space is under each armpit in that position? Is it comfortable? Whatever it is for them, whatever feedback they have. The next is a sideline position. A sideline, again, is another pose that we have a right side and a left side. So I look at both and I take the lowest of the two for the score. But I obviously keep track of both just because we'll want to, it's always good to keep objective measurements and see how things changes after you provide interventions. The position of the arm can be dependent on the client. It can be straight or it can be bent. But again, I note which one it is because it's interesting if they're not able to access both.
supporting the head, like she's demonstrating here, or out straight. So again, head. And here you're looking again from a form standpoint, real long, for the most part. Good. And then you're asking the athlete if it's comfortable.
So in the sideline position, the legs can be straight or bent, arms can be straight or bent. I'm interested to see again, like the curve of their spine. Here you get a really good look too at the relationship between the width of someone's shoulders and the width of their hips, and how much side bending or rotation um, forces may be going around their lumbar spine. You also get to see when they line up in a sideline position, like what their relationship is between the pelvis and the thorax, right? Like you start to see how coupled it is or how decoupled it is. All just interesting information that might be good to have while planning a program. Um, Even though we're looking primarily here, can they rest comfortably or not? It's good information to have, especially if they're like, no, it hurts my back. So the next posture is a cross leg posture. Cross leg posture has a lot of good things to look at. It ends up being one of the postures that's really good to access some tuning in, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit.
The next posture is cross-legged. So simply down in a cross-legged position. Either leg in front, start. And here you're looking for obvious symmetrical positions of the leg, making sure the spine is sitting nice and tall, and super closely tilted into the pelvis. And then specifically in the legs, we want to make sure that the crossing of the leg happens about 3 to 4 fingers above the malleoli line. So she's crossing right at that point. That's an important acupressure point that this posture helps us out. So once I check one position, I ask her to do a meditation for 20 minutes, and then I'll have her switch leg. And check the symmetry of her legs, her posture, and if she's crossing at that
So the cross leg position, again, it's a right and a left side. You want to look at both, score for the lowest. Take note just to see how their body changes in each position. Don't forget to be looking at the spine, as well as the hips, knees, and ankles. And then noting too, are they able to have the cross of their legs happen at that acupressure point that's just about 4 fingers north of the medial malleoli. Next posture is half lotus. So the half lotus pose is an interesting posture, and often people ask why it's included, and it's included because in Philip Beach's model, in the archetype of humans, we did not have shoes, and so we were spending a lot of time barefoot on the earth. And when you spend time barefoot on the earth, oftentimes you'll step on something sharp, and you'll have to be able to examine the bottom of your foot, and perhaps even do work on the bottom of your foot to maintain the health of the skin. And so this is why the half lotus position is so important.
The next posture is half lotus. So it'll come out of the cross-legged position. You'll take one leg and bring it on top. So in half lotus, we're again looking at the symmetry of the leg. We're looking specifically at the ankle, making sure it's not super inverted here, which it could be a little bit better for her, but it's pretty good. The other thing I'm looking for is how flat the top of her foot is. Her big toe is lifted up a little bit. I would ideally like it to look a little flatter. And then again, we're looking at the top of the spine and how comfortable it is for her to be there. able to move forward. This is the posture for her that not access very well and it's probably not comfortable.
So in the video, the right side there, I would give her a 2 or 3, right? Depending on how uncomfortable she was, how quickly. And on the left side, I would give a 4. Also, a good reminder that the video shared is you get a great look here when your foot is flipped up like that on the status of the first ray in the first great toe and how depressed it may be. So it's great information about foot health. The next posture is the side sit.
Posture again of the spine, pelvis, and head. The fact that she can sit there without herself supporting herself with her arms. And then back here on the back foot, we're looking, does she get her foot turned up towards the ceiling? Ideally, I could come through and step on her foot with my whole body weight and it should just hurt. If she's got the good mobility in her ankle and her knee hip, that would be beautiful. So it looks like she's causing her ankle to open up a little bit more. But for the most part, this looks really good. And how comfortable is it? Yeah. And then I'll have her switch legs. So bring the other leg in front. One behind her. Here. This one actually looks like it might be a little bit more comfortable.
So in the side sit position for her, the same thing we saw in the half lotus on the right, the foot, the great toe position, and in the ankle mobility, it was exposed in the side sit as well. So it's nice to start seeing patterns like that. But ultimately, too, here we're looking at, do they have the hip mobility in order to stay upright, not lean over like the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and how do their knees feel? Are they just able to access this posture? The next one is called Neanderthal, or also commonly called a Taylor sit.
The next Neanderthal, or Taylor sit. The legs are going to come across and bring the shoulders together. And it doesn't matter how close you are to the pelvis, so whatever is comfortable. Again, you're looking for symmetry of the leg. Pose position, posture, spine, and making sure that not supporting yourself with your hands.
So in all these seated postures, you want to make sure that you don't need the support of your hands. It's not restful if you're needing to support yourself. And then also too, when you're just looking at development standpoint, like if you can't sit on the ground unsupported, like you're at the level of like less than a 4-month-old, right? Like from a core control and mobility standpoint. So it is something that's really important to be able to, like a movement pattern that's a milestone that we need to be able to achieve. Next in the rest postures is the long sit.
And here you can have your legs together out in front of you or a little bit abducted. It really not a problem either way. But you're looking for the symmetry and the posture of the spine. And you hang out here for a few minutes.
The long sit's pretty straightforward. It's traditional seated straight leg position, and it's also interesting to note. I like to note how much abduction people need to make it doable. The next position is Japanese sit.
The next posture is
So I do like to palpate people's feet, plantar surfaces of feet, sometimes maybe with sometimes other parts of their body while they're in these positions to have a really good gauge of how in tune they are, or how rested they really are. So a lot of times, and you'll see it in the we'll do it in the toe sit too, is I'll run my knuckles along their arch, and if they like totally yell out in pain, I would say that that's not a very restful position. And so, especially in the athletic population, or just when people think that you are testing them in any way, they try to fake it. They try to like make it seem like they passed the test. And so I'm always like looking at their eyes, like asking them a few questions about how they really feel. Yeah, rubbing certain points of their body that may be tender but shouldn't be. See, are they really resting? Like, are they not feeling anything? There's this mentality that people need to feel something in order for it to like be doing something, and that's just when it comes to rest, that is like the wrong attitude to have. So toasted is next.
Next position is similar to Japanese, but it's called toe sitting. So she'll come up off of her heels, pull her toes up underneath her, and then make sure she's sitting on her heads of her metatarsals, and then sitting back. So here you're making sure that the weight is going directly to the joint, not on her toes, that the heel is directly perpendicular above that. And if we look from the back, how symmetrical is it? So you can see she's sort of loading the outside of her foot a little bit more than inside, so I can view her and see. And she might find that it's a little bit more uncomfortable to do it that way. You can also sort of play around with their arch and see. Again, this right foot on her looks like it's a little bit tighter, so a little bit more out of tune. But for the most part, this is very accessible for her. Again, looking at the spine, and she feels pretty comfortable in this position.
So toe sit, we'll talk about this more later in the lecture, is one that people love to use because it feels like it's doing something. But if it feels like it's doing something, then you're not actually resting, and you're actually could be causing more pain and dysfunction and injury instead of getting the benefit from toe sit. So, as you saw on her right foot, the right foot could not access the posture as good as the left foot could. And so this is not necessarily even for her the best rest posture. I'm sure with some exercise, it could be one that is more accessible and then truly could be a rest posture. Drinking posture is a variation of the toe sit.
The next posture is called the drinking. So it originates from the toe sit. Those who can't toe sit probably won't be able to do the drinking. The staying back on her heels, she's going to flex forward as if she's leaning down to drink out of a pond. And so her hands need to be free, and she would have to scoop the water out of the drink. So we're looking, how is this, how comfortable is this, and can she do it and maintain everything in that hole?
So drinking is a very challenging position to be in. Really challenges your core stability and your mobility to the fullest, especially the mobility of the back side of the body, which is going to be your back muscles, your flexors, your quads, and your dorsiflexors. Full squat or deep squat is the last of the 12 postures.
The last posture is squat. Here to the side, I'd like to see it press up a little bit higher and straighter prior to the rock back, which makes it a little bit hard to do. From the front, feet straight ahead, knees in line with the toes. And you probably would want to rest here for 20 minutes, but you can access the posture.
So yeah, she's doing a classic thing that a lot of people do that say that they can do a full deep squat, is they're resting their body on their legs. They're not actually using any of their core stability to be in that deep squat position. It's not that it's bad to rest your trunk on your legs, it's that I want to see that they can do both. So if we were to ask her to lift her chest off of her legs, she would fall over backwards because she's lacking a little bit of the mobility in her feet and ankles She needs her knees to come forward a little bit more in order to be a counterweight for her trunk to come up. So it requires a little bit more ankle mobility and a little bit more core stability for her. But overall, I mean, she looks pretty good. Most people don't even get there. Another great test, looking at a similar thought process of biomechanical tunes, is described in the literature in 2010. It's called the sitting and rising test. Basically, it looks at the ability to go from a standing position to a seated position on the ground and then stand back up. It was shown to be a significant predictor of mortality in 51 to 95-year-olds, right? So they looked at the people who could, how much assistance they needed to get down and up from the floor, and the people who were still alive, had a longer life, happened to also be the people who needed less assistance. Another study they did 3 years later looked at the sit and rising test in relationship to flexibility, and they found that it was partially dependent on flexibility. But that makes sense because we know you need a certain degree of mobility flexibility to be able to access the full range of motion needed for floor sitting. Okay? So basically it's out of 10 points. You have 5 points possible for the sitting down and 5 points possible for the rising up. Basically you subtract 1 point for each use of assistance. So right, whether you put your hand down on the floor, the hand down on your leg, or you take you go to a half kneeling position in order to get on the floor, all of those are assistance points, and so it subtracts. So maximal ability would be 10. Lowest ability would be 0. I like to track the score for the sitting as well as the rising. So the homeostatic acupressure points, or the trigger point assessment, is something that I learned after taking Dr. Ma's dry needling course. And basically, trigger point palpation has been described in the literature by many people, but gives us some good insight into the body's state of homeostasis and resiliency. So typically when the body is stressed out or in a sympathetic state, we'll have more active trigger points. And they've found in studies that people's trigger points activate in a certain pattern, right? The top 24 trigger points have a certain pattern. Like the first one's going to be on your elbow, and the second one I think is on the inside of your knee. And so it's like basically the more pain or stress someone is under, the more trigger points get activated, and the bigger area, tender, right? The area starts to get larger and larger around the trigger point. So I find this to be a pretty easy test and retest after doing any intervention that's going to be aimed at accessing the parasympathetic state. So what I'll do for you guys is I'll photocopy the book from the Dr. Ma's book of the top 24 trigger points, so you can see the exact locations, and you can use those as a guide or a map. So when we were talking about improving biomechanical tunes, tapping into that parasympathetic state, talking about the ability to access the rest postures. So accessing these 12 postures is key. The big key is to spend time cycling through postures of rest throughout the day, and especially after exercise. The reason it's especially important after exercise is because that is when your body is most supple and moldable, right? You're warm, everything is able to get a little bit better range of motion. That's the whole point of like the heated yoga, right? Is that do the yoga in the heated room and you're able to access poses that you couldn't before, right? It's just when we're warm, our fascia, our muscles, our joints are just a little bit more able to get into positions, right? So Philip basically would say, like, after working out, if you spend 20 minutes on these things, you're retraining, you're remolding those full ranges of motion in your body. Whereas opposed to if you just get in your car, you drive home and it takes you 20 minutes. 20 minutes is like the time in the research that takes a tissue to go through a creep process, right? A deformation process. And so it's basically like that's your 3D printer scenario is do I want to 3D printer me into the range of motion that is required for my car seat? Or do I want to 3D printer me into the range of motion available for a full seated position on the floor, right? The key, the key is this, is to make the postures approachable and comfortable by accessing and using props. This is practicing rest. So you should not feel anything, right? When you go to sleep at night, you're not feeling anything. It feels just like you're laying down and that's it, right? You're comfortable. You're not feeling anything. So for the body to know that it's resting, it is imperative that we feel safe and that we feel nothing. We feel relaxed. We literally don't feel tension. We don't feel pain. We don't feel discomfort. So oftentimes people will be like, yeah, that's toasted. I feel it. Like it really, I feel it in my feet. But I'm okay. I can do it. I can hold it. How many seconds do you want me to hold it? I'm like, no, you're missing the point. It's a rest posture. You shouldn't feel anything. You should feel like you could be there for days on end, right? Like, it is like my biggest pet peeve. You do not always have to feel something in order for it to be helpful. I want you paying attention to how you feel before and how you feel after, but during, if it is a rest posture, it should feel like nothing. Gosh, I get so heated about that. The key is to do it as much as you can throughout the day. That's what we would do naturally. When we're not running after our dinner, right? Or running from being someone's dinner, we're sitting around and resting. So I could be working on my computer and working and giving my body this feeling of, oh, we're resting now, right? Like, what a great idea. I will tell you, since I started teaching Phillips work in workshops, I significantly noticed a difference how tired I am by the end of the day. It used to be if I taught a workshop by the end of the day, I was exhausted. If I teach a workshop on this and I'm spending time during the workshop seated on the ground, even though I'm still teaching and moving, at the end of the day, I am way more rested. I do not feel as tired. It's crazy to me. Same thing. I started taking my afternoon nap if I needed one. I took it on the floor instead of a bed or a couch. And I can nap on the floor for about 15 minutes and wake up and feel so energized. If I fall asleep on a couch or a bed for 15 minutes in the same time of the day, I wake up and all I want to do is just sleep for longer. I'm not rested at all. So, whenever you're sitting, working on a computer, watching TV, eating, talking, choose to grab some props and use the floor instead of a piece of furniture. Maximize your range of motion. Make sure it doesn't feel like anything. I promise you, after an amount of time doing it, you'll be able to access a deeper range of motion. It should not feel like stretching. It should not feel like deep tissue. It should not feel uncomfortable. It should feel like you're just sitting there. It doesn't have to be for hours. It simply takes 5 to 10 minutes and cycle through 3 to 5 postures. It's also recommended that 10 to 20 minutes, perfect world, 30 minutes after exercising, spend some time going through the various postures on the floor. That's it. It's simple. It's like crazy simple. People make it difficult by having this idea in their head that it has to feel like something. More than likely, you just worked out and felt a whole lot of everything in your body. Why do you feel like you have to keep feeling something? Rest, recover, let loose. So, when you have inaccessible rest postures, Okay, so back up. What I was just talking about, all the things I was talking about resting, those are postures that you can actually rest in, meaning that they can be accessible, maybe with a prop, maybe without a prop. If even with props, you cannot get in the posture and rest, which is exactly like a toe sit or a Japanese sit for me, they are not the postures I will be resting in. Posture I can rest in comfortably is cross leg and Taylor sit and Z sit. So I use those, the turned out postures, for my resting. But I work on the linear postures for my exercises. This would be exercises to work on accessing more variability in my rest. So the inaccessible rest postures for me: toe sit, Japanese sit, drinking posture, full squat. Those ones I cannot rest in, but they become my homework of the things that I do to bring my biomechanical tune back, right? To retune my body. They become my home exercise program. I practice moving into and getting out of these postures. This is not rest, but it's moving towards being able to rest in more ways. And obviously the mobility and stability, the targets is often the feet, the pelvis, the hips, the rib cage, and the shoulders. Doing it a little bit and often is the key to improving. It is better to do this 4 or 5 times reps, 4 or 5 times per day, right? So 20 times, 20 reps, let's say, than doing 2 sets of 10 in your exercise and that's it, right? It's the revisiting it throughout the day as if you were using those as rest postures that is key to making them become possible in your body, as well as still honoring that the maximum mobility is going to be achieved when they're still relatively restful or comfortable, no pain. So that means I have to use as many props as I need to make it possible. So that's what we're going to talk about now, is improving tune. So if you are challenged in a cross-leg position, a cross-leg self-massage is a great way to improve the mobility of the inner part of your leg that can allow you to do a cross-leg motion. So you may not be able to hear this video okay, but we're basically taking that cross-leg position, coming to it in a half kneeling position. We take the top leg and we use that as a massage tool on the bottom leg. And rocking back and forth side to side moves that massage tool around. We're literally using our leg as a massage tool for the other leg. That is the beauty of the cross leg posture. And when we're doing it naturally, our body is doing it naturally. So here we're just adding to it. You can also take that into a foot massage. So now the shin is massaging the plantar surface of the opposite foot. This is a great way to introduce self massage and a rest posture at the same time. You do that on both legs and you recheck your cross-legged position and voila, your legs are able to be opened up a little bit more. You can also work on transitioning into and out of the poses. So cross-leg to tall kneeling, this is a roll through the cross leg, and again, it is a natural soft tissue mobilization. As we come into a tall kneeling position, that leg rolls over the soft tissue on the bottom leg. It's also teaching us how to use our feet actively, pushing our feet into the ground to initiate lift in our pelvis. This is using props. So perhaps it's uncomfortable being in a cross-legged position, but you still want to work on the mobility and the pattern getting in and out of it. You can do that cross-leg kneel just seated on a bolster or step. And what that does is it lifts our pelvis up higher than our feet to begin with, so it's easier to initiate the movement. And then it's less deep to go into the seated position, so it doesn't require as much mobility in our hips. Now, one of the things that improves our tune is not just being down on the ground, but getting up from the ground. Philip Beach calls these exercises erectorcises, right? Becoming erect, coming to standing. And so cross leg to standing is the ultimate way of standing up from cross leg. Some of us who are not as in tune, meaning I cannot do this, and so I have to come from cross leg to tall kneeling to half kneel to stand, right? So it takes more assistance, like the sit and rising test. And but this is a great way to practice, and I would practice this with the prop, but we'll let the video show you what we're talking about. And the great thing here is you start to see that an active dorsiflexion is the key component in what makes a rest posture an active or transitional movement posture. Meaning, when we have dorsiflexed feet in a posture, that's telling our body, yeah, we're resting, but we might have to go somewhere very quickly, right? So it's an active rest posture. So when she stands up from the ground, has a nice strong dorsiflexion and she pushes the edges of her feet into the ground, that's what lifts her pelvis up. The other thing that helps lift her pelvis up is her hands reach forward and her eyes follow. This sensory organ integration and connection of our foot to create lift in our body is something that we will continue to dive into as we learn about tensegrity as well. So here's that same thing with props. So this is how I have to do it because I don't quite have the strength and ability to do this yet. The same concept, she uses active dorsiflexion, pushes the sides of her feet into the ground to lift her pelvis up. She also reaches her hands forward and looks forward and follows where she's going. Another great way to stand up from a cross-leg position is as a rotational exercise. So you can push into the ground with one leg more than the other, and it sort of creates this rotational pop-up and spin. So you'll see her demonstrate this, as well as my friend Dr. Kim demonstrate it perfectly as well. And it just unrotates our legs for us. And then we can easily sit back down and do it the same way. I would love to be able to do that. I was working a baseball camp with Dr. Kim, and I saw him do this, and I was like, dang, let me videotape you. I'm so jealous. I didn't even have to ask him to do it. He just did this naturally. He's like, oh, we need to go somewhere? Okay. And then he was just ready. So here's that same cross leg to standing with rotation with the prop. And then from the front view. It looks a little bit more complicated than it really is. The way our legs are set up, when you push, it just kind of twists us that way anyway. So you're always going to be rotating the direction that the front leg is pointing. So her right leg is in front, so her foot is towards the right. That means you're going to rotate towards the right. Sorry. Her right leg was in front, her foot's pointing to the left. That means she's rotating towards the left. Front leg points in the direction we're rotating. The right leg takes us left. Left leg takes us right. The Japanese sit now is a plantar flex position. It truly is more of a rest posture. If we were going to move from a Japanese sit somewhere, we would have to dorsiflex our feet first, which would take us into toe sit. So a great way to improve the tune and ability in the Japanese sit is through a massage of the quad. This is a great way also to improve your tightness in your back. Remember, we talked about embryology, how the quads are part of your back muscles. This is a great way if somebody has a lot of hypertonus in their lumbar paraspinal to open that out without actually having to do the work in the spine. So basically, you sit in a Japanese sit with as many pillows as you need to make it comfortable on your knees. Maybe you might have to do pillows on your ankles instead if your ankles are uncomfortable in full plantar flexion. And then you just do like a percussive massage on your quads. Like literally, I'm like tell people I'm like it's like taking a meat cleaver and like tenderizing the meat of your leg. So here, Japanese sit to toe sit is a way to start to tune us into the erector size of moving from Japanese sit. And it's nice to, if you don't love accessing toe sit, to start introducing a little toe sit into your world and actively opening up the back line of your body, alternating back and forth between Japanese sit, rising to your knees, tucking your feet under, rocking back as far as you can, coming out of it, and then lowering back down into it. Another great transition is from toe sit to full squat. So this is one I like to practice too. For me, I actually have to put pads under my knees so that my metatarsal joints can be more on the ground. So I'll have pads on the front and the back, which I think I have a video of as well. But all she does is just rock her body back, set her heels down, and then stand straight up. You can rock back and forth, toe sit to full sit, or you can add in a stand too. And the key is controlling into the toe sit. So Philip's speech likes to say, landing your postures, landing your positions like a helicopter, or taking off, standing up like a helicopter, right? You're removing momentum from the equation. So here's the view from the front. So I just gave her a little cue to use a little bit more control from her adductors, connect into her core, slow down the movement. The more you can push into your feet, the more slow you go as well. It requires a lot of foot control, actually, more than people probably appreciate. Here's the prop setup that I use. So with the pad under my knees in the front, I make it less mobility required in the toe sit, and then also easier to initiate the rock back to the full squat. And then she should do a better job controlling her knees down because there's less range of motion to control here. And over time, I would be removing the props. Removing the props makes it more difficult. That's how I would progress it. From the front view, she rocks back and rocks forward. And the interesting thing here, too, you can see that she's more challenged with the control over her right leg and her left leg. And if we go back to her original screen that we did, the right foot and ankle, the right hip, that whole right side of her was the one that in all the rest posture screen tended to be the thing that had the majority of the problems as well. So toe sit lowering her props is one of my favorite ones to do. It's the one I probably give out the most, and we have a few videos on that. So basically make sure they have something in front of them to lean onto to unweight them. You're going to roll over their toes, bring their heels directly over the metatarsals, and then slowly lower their knees down to the ground. And you might need 1 pillow, you might need 5 pillows. So, and then you press into your hands to come out of it so you can maintain those same positions. So roll over the toe joint, keep the heels where they're at, lower the knees down. Try not to let the heels drift back when you're lowering the knees down, and then sit your butt back only as far as you can comfortably, and then come up out of it. So this is what I would give like 4 or 5 reps, 4 or 5 times a day. So here's another view of it. Here in this video, I think it's a 1-minute long video I had posted on Instagram, and basically I'm trying to teach him how to stay over the weight-bearing surface, the weight-bearing part of the metatarsal phalangeal joint, because he does what a lot of people do, is just bypasses the joint and goes to weight-bearing on the toes. So in one sense, the name toe sit is a little bit of a misnomer because you're not actually on the toes at all. You're on the metatarsal phalangeal joint. Those are the weight-bearing surfaces that you're driving all the weight down through. If you're on your toes, you're actually going to end up with a lot of pain in your feet or your toes. So I'm using 2 props here. We have a prop under the knees to bring the floor higher up, but then we also have a prop under the toes. So just kind of like you would put your heels up on something for squatting, so your heels were higher than the front of your foot. Here we're putting the metatarsal phalangeal joint up higher than the toes, so that the toes don't have to go through as much extension in order for you to reach the weight-bearing surface. So I'm saying first find the weight-bearing surface. Once you find the weight-bearing surface, no matter where your heels are at, keep them there, then lower your toes down. Then lower your knees down. Ideally, over time, we should get to a position where our heels are directly over the metatarsal joint. Some people are so tight, though, that they can't do that just yet. So I have him unweight himself on the chair, and then scoot forward just a little bit. And I help him know where that weight bearing is on his foot. So I fold him over his toe joint, and I press down on his heel so he can feel. This is what I mean by weight bearing. You feel how sturdy it is, right? Then once we have that weight bearing surface, then I have him slowly lower his knees down to the pad and then come back out of it the same way. That is how he practices. So the next video is another toe sit variation. And here we see he does a pretty good job of coming to the weight bearing surface, but he loses, like he lets his foot roll out to the side. He's trying to avoid his big toe. So I give him a ball in between his ankles so that it just is a little bit of a cue to have him keep that good position. So he rolls over, finds the weight bearing surfaces. Notice for him his heels can't quite get to that position, and then he goes down. And ideally I would give him another prop in front of himself so he had less range of motion to go through, because you see as he goes down to reach that lower position, he's coming off of the weight bearing surfaces and he's just on his toes, right? So I would give him another pillow. So most of my athletes too, I always tell them, grab as many pillows as you think you need, then grab 2 more. Because I'd rather have them have too many pillows and make it too easy than not enough. So here's some modifications for the drinking posture. So this is full expression of the posture. And here's with props. So you could raise the ground up so they don't have to go over quite as much. I'm figuring it out. So here it's less challenging because she has less range of motion to go through. I could have put the prop under her knees too. Depends on what the challenging part of it for her. Is it the toe sit, or is it the bending forward, or is it both? You could have added both in too. An easy way to modify the drinking posture too is just using your hands for support. So the hands would be placed in front, which is this one. So bring the hands down, and then she's just bowing down. And again, it's like, can she keep her weight over her toes? Can you keep your weight back and still bend over? That is the most mobility, the most challenging of the posture. Anybody can kind of lean forward and bring their butt with them, but the more you bring your butt with you forward, the more of a tendency you're going to have to fall over forward. So full squat to stand with props. So again, you can put the props under the heels, stand right up. Anything to get them in the position. So see, now that she can have her knees go more forward, she can lift her chest off her thighs, which is the problem we saw in the beginning, right? So next is a sumo squat to full squat to stand with props. So this is if people have a challenge getting down into the squat, I have them get there from a forward fold. So she's going to forward fold, bending her knees as much as she needs to, and then sits her butt down, then lifts her chest off, and then stands up. So it's like we're building strength from the concentric first, because eccentrically lowing down into that full squat is pretty challenging, unless sometimes you have somebody to hold their hands in front of you, or like maybe hold a post in front of them to be able to really sit their butt down. So I love just the bending over, bend your knees as much as you need to, drop your butt down, lift your chest up, and then connection to your feet, and then come straight up. That is the key from standing from a full squat, is coming straight up, not dropping your chest down and then coming up, which is a bad habit a lot of people have. So toe sit to full squat to stand to return with the prop. So we're just bringing them all together, rocking back, standing up, and then coming straight down and rocking forward. We'll play that again. So we rock back, knees lift, and straight up. Notice she comes just straight up, as if there's like a water fountain underneath of her, just lifting her straight up. As well as on the way down, she comes straight down. There's no dropping of her chest down towards her thighs at all. Here's a video of the Taylor sit to stand. So here again is an active dorsiflexion. So it's a dorsiflex posture, which means you can initially move out of it. Nice dorsiflex feet gives us a strong edge of the pinky side of our foot, and you can push it into the ground and just stand straight up. And so he pushes. See, you can even see his feet become really active. His toes extend, his feet dorsiflex, and he pushes into the ground to stand up. Play one more time. You start to notice that these postures really encourage an active foot, and how an active foot, just like active hands, can direct our body where to go. And here, Dr. Kim demonstrating Japanese sit, toe sit, full squat stand, which is also cool. When I was in Japan for this trip, it was cool. We went to a tea ceremony, and so it was cool to see that was the way that the women doing the tea ceremony moves through the room as well. So Japanese sit, more of a rested position. When you're ready to move, you flip your feet under into a toe sit, you rock back, and then you stand up.
And then stand up. And then squat down.
And then reverses it, comes
Rock
straight
forward
down,
to toe sit.
forward,
Japanese sit.
and then flex the toes.
And then one more time through. Toe sit. Squat. Stand up. Squat. Toe sit.
I was having fun videotaping.
Japanese sit.
So here's some other demonstrations of how you could use these rest postures to improve some mobility, or just use as an exercise to improve. So this is a hybrid sit. A cowboy sit is a hybrid toe sit and full squat, or you could do a cowboy sit in a more rested position, which would be a hybrid Japanese sit and full squat. And then I'm adding in spine flexion. So remember, the toe sit in the Japanese sit is a full opening of the back body, and so adding inflection just helps to open that up more. The reason I did that is because my quad tends to be pretty tight, and so I wanted to do things that encouraged more mobility through the quad or the back side of the body. So I tuck under one leg for my full squat, and then here. And the great thing too is I get to be working on driving my knee forward in the full squat position, maximizing my ankle mobility and my hip mobility. It's also the only way that I can really access a full squat is half one at a time, because of that left knee, as you see, is problem knee. So I can't fully Japanese sit on the left, so I put a pad underneath me, and then I bring my right leg back into that half squat. I need a few more props on one side than the other, but it's definitely doable. And my range of motion has changed mostly when I honor that. It doesn't feel like anything but restful. It really does make a difference. So here's just a example of how you could use the floor-based rest and postures and exercises for an entire movement session. So sped up. But we'll go swim in sideline, and then I'm using transitions from down dog to a toe sit to Japanese sit, cross leg, mini cross leg variations, and then rolling through cross leg to half kneeling, kind of like a blend of Pilates and toe sitting and everything. So I'm doing that as some kettlebell things. Full squat. I was supine. So I used a lot of different of the rest postures here. Long sit, sideline again. So when I do sessions, I try to get as many of the positions as I can. So down dog to Japanese sit. This is a one I commonly do. So I'll press down into down dog, stretch out my calves a little bit, and then I'll work on rolling over my toes into the Japanese sit. So I'll come up to the weight bearing surfaces as I'm transitioning the calf stretches. So I'm practicing that same articulation that is needed in the toe sit. And then I roll over the toes into Japanese sit, which feels really good. So another example, cross leg and full squat preparation. So here I use a lot of props. So again, you see me do the same sort of stretching out with my feet. squats, cross legs. Then I add all my props, lower down, lift up, lower down, lift up. I'm using rocking to help me get there too, so a little momentum to help me teach what it feels like to get my pelvis over my feet. And I'm like, let's try full squat. Cross leg was doing pretty good. Because once I start feeling that feeling of my pelvis lifting up over my feet, it becomes a little bit easier, right? I've created a movement experience. My body has an easier time organizing it. Oh, that was it. So those are some good examples of using the rest postures as both resting and tuning them. So using them as exercises to work on them being accessible so then we can use them in a scenario of rest, if that makes sense. As I share more movement sessions with you guys, you'll notice that I use them as like bases for a lot of the floor-based movements, right? Like I'll be working on each one of those postures and moving in and out of them as a way to tune them. So what I would suggest is that just in your own body, you start spending more time on the floor. So when you're watching these videos, when you're reading articles, when you're watching TV or hanging out with your kids, start spending more time on the ground, but make sure you have props around so that you can be comfortable, right? And just do small bits of it and start to notice, maybe do a check-in and before and after it, and see how you feel. But what you'll start noticing is the more time you spend on there, as long as it's comfortable, it really is starting to retune your body. So included in the resources, I also have a handout of like a score sheet that you can start practicing scoring these in your patients and start to I'd say at first just score them and notice if they can access any rest, and maybe the ones that they can access, suggest that they start doing that after their workout. And then maybe pick one or two that you would like to improve their ability to access and give them an exercise with props that they can do 4 or 5 reps of 4 or 5 times a day. Maybe it's the lowering down into toe sit, or maybe it's Japanese sit with the quad massage, or maybe it's the cross leg massage. Just pick one thing for them to work on. And I just want you to notice what it changes in their body, or maybe they'll give you feedback on what it changes in their body. And same thing in your body. Pick one that you need to work on, start working on it regularly, and then use the other ones just throughout the day as actual rest postures with as many props as you need to make them comfortable, and start to notice how you feel energy-wise, how you feel body-wise, and how you feel mentally, like focus-wise too. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at what a difference it makes.